Hey everybody, welcome back to Sounds Like a Drum, Cadence independent media production. Today, we are addressing a common practice that could do some real damage to your drums. One of our favorite things to do here is address concerns that we see in forums and comment sections on the internet where people are experimenting with their instruments, running into struggles, possibly having real problems, and digging deep here to figure out how we can save other people from going down these dangerous paths. What we're addressing today is the possibility of damaging either your hoop or your drum or both by tuning the head unevenly. It makes sense that we would think that normally we tune a drum evenly to get an even sound out of it, and it's pressure, it's a lot of pressure in some cases, against the edge of the drum and distributed throughout the hoops that if we mix up, it could definitely start to bend the hoop, it could affect the round of the drum, anything is possible. A tangible example of this that you may have seen in previous episodes is that when we use a ruler to get an even height on the bottom hoop of the snare drum, because that bearing edge itself is not level all the way around to accommodate for the snare beds, we end up with an uneven hoop. In this particular case, this is literally bending the hoop, and you can actually see this on many snare drums if you have the drum in tune with itself on the snare side, just by setting it on a tabletop and seeing that it is tacoed a little bit away from where the snare wires are laying. Now wait, does this mean that we have damaged irrevocably every single snare side hoop that we have in the studio? Actually, no, it doesn't. This is simply a byproduct of using a flexible hoop on a drum to get an even tension on the head on a side of a drum where the surface is actually uneven. Now, let's go on a little experiment here. Let's take one of the tension rods out of this snare drum and see what happens. The first thing we notice is that it sounds out of tune because we took a bunch of tension out of one of the nodes around the edge. But did we break anything? Let's do some tuning adjustments to try to even out the sound of the drum a little bit, try to see if we can get it back close to where it was before. It's not all the way back, it still sounds a little wonky, but is that because we damaged the hoop or maybe even the drum? Actually, no, we didn't damage the hoop at all, we didn't damage the drum at all. All we did was make it sound wildly out of tune. The fact of the matter is that these parts are extremely rigid, but they are also flexible in their own way, particularly the hoop, and they are designed to accommodate for uneven tensions around. By removing the rod that we did, the rods adjacent to it are now holding down that area of it. We've lost some tension in terms of tuning, but overall, we're not damaging the hoop at all. We still have plenty of pressure in that region. There is also no new intense opposing force pushing back to force that hoop out of round in that area either. This is something that gets talked about in forums and in comment sections a lot. Concerns about tension damaging hoops, damaging drums, something really fatal happening to your instrument when it's simply not the case. Granted, this is an extreme demonstration. The reason we're doing this is because the conversations that we're seeing are not even around something as extreme as this, but simply the idea that the rods all need to be at the exact same tension at all times, or else something terrible is going to happen that's going to cost us lots of money and be super duper tragic. Now, coming from literally the other side of it, think about how much force is exerted when you play aggressive rim shots on a snare drum. Some people worry about the idea of really damaging their rims and possibly even their drum simply by striking the drum really aggressively, when in reality, there's a tremendous amount of force coming back at us from the drum head in that instance as well. It's not as though we are just hitting the rim in a vacuum like we're hammering away with a hammer or something. The truth of the matter in both of these instances is that the thing that's going to break first is the head or the stick. They are absolutely the weak points in this equation. So the idea that a little bit of difference in tension across the head, or even really crushing it with rim shots, is going to somehow send this drum to the trash is simply not going to happen. Now let's consider the opposite direction. Let's hammer this with some cross stick. Never once in my life or in any conversation I've ever had with another player has there been concern about banging away on the hoop, damaging the hoop. Maybe taking it a little bit out of tune if you're really swinging for the fences, but these things are made of metal and we're hitting them with wood. The wood's going to give first. Let's move to the floor tom now and see what happens when we do a similar experiment of removing one of the tension rods from that drum. Floor tom's much lower tension in general, so the effect is significantly different than here, but still, we are hearing that loss of tension in that spot, but we're not damaging the hoop yet. Let's do the same thing we did to the snare, tune it a little bit with that rod missing and get it back to sounding like itself again. This is a larger drum in terms of diameter and also has significantly less lugs than the snare drum, but the effect is the same. We took some tension away, but we're not destroying the hoop by doing this. There's a lot more room between these lugs where it might seem like we're putting a bend in it, but the fact is, this is a steel triple flange hoop, and again, the head is the weak point. It's going to give before the hoop does. If you've ever replaced a drum head before, you may have experienced the phenomena of having the head just finger tight, very low tension, starting to turn tension rods with the drum key and discovering that when you turn one of them and add a little tension, the rods to either side of it lose tension and become loose again. This is an absolutely perfect demonstration of the rigidity of the hoop. It's pushing that whole side of the head down a little bit and releasing the tension of the adjacent lugs. This is exactly what we're talking about here. That is so stiff that it's doing the job even if one of them falls out. Right down to, numerous times for me, I've had one fall out of the drum during a gig because it was tuned low, and I didn't notice until after the show was over because it didn't change that much. In the past, we've made a few videos about different types of hoops and specifically different construction types because they feel different, they can sound a little different, they definitely behave differently. On the more extreme side of things, there are some die-cast hoops that can be pretty brittle and have the possibility of actually breaking them under extreme stress. I've never done that. I've seen it done. It's not something we need to worry about on a day-to-day. On the other side, some vintage drums have triple flange hoops that are very thin, 1.2 to 1.6 millimeter, that are actually brass, often chrome over brass. These hoops will sound amazing and warm and fat, but because they're brass, you can't actually bend them with the force of the stick because they're so thin. These are situations where knowing what you're using is worth understanding because it means you can make choices and not smash away at the thin brass hoops, but then maybe be wary of the die cast that, if nothing else, is just going to break a lot of sticks. Today, we have Pearl Super Hoops on this drum, triple flange steel, and there's nothing wrong with hitting those right on the edge as hard as we want to. Up till this point, we've only been talking about the possibility of the hoops getting damaged from uneven tension, but we do need to talk about the possibility of the shell getting damaged too. The short answer here is this isn't something that we need to be worried about because, again, we have the head contacting the shell, not the hoops. So that is going to give well before anything terrible happens to the shell of the drum itself. This is true of a metal drum, a wood drum, doesn't matter what it's made of. Just remember that the head is the thing that is going to be stretching. If you've ever pulled a snare side head off of a drum, you can see how much that has stretched, and frankly, a battered head too. What this means for us is that we only really need to be concerned with the state of the head, and the tensioning is about getting the drum to sound good, not a matter of saving the life of the hoop or the drum itself. We do need to mention that there are some non-standard styles of heads out there that are made of other kinds of material, aramid fiber for instance, which under really high tension with a standard drum can actually do some damage. Today, we're just talking about polyester film. If you're using those other ones, do be careful, read the instructions, but for now, standard heads. In the end, how do we avoid the possibility of there being some damage? Let's move slowly. Let's tension things up slowly. Make sure that we are tensioning evenly. Let's make sure that the heads are on the drum level, that there isn't any kind of slippage to one side or the other as we're tensioning up a new head. And make sure that as we go up in tension, we're paying attention to the entire head. This will set us up well for the possibility of experimenting with extremes later on if we want to, or even something as simple as releasing a bit of tension on one of the tuning rods to alleviate crosstalk between the drums or something like that. This is all within the bounds of normal use of the equipment that we have here. These drums are designed to go through a lot of different tunings, and we don't need to be afraid of the possibility of a surprise explosion just because we did something a little unorthodox in the tuning. This issue, like a lot of them, is a perfect example of what happens with groupthink and reinforcement on message boards, oftentimes with no demonstrative proof of any kind. It's just a lot of people agreeing with each other about an idea that somebody had. And we need to make sure that we don't spend too much time freaking out about stuff that isn't actually an issue so that we can get back to the business of making music and enjoying this instrument. And with that, if you love what you're seeing today, please follow the link below to our Patreon. It's the best way to help us continue to make the series here. Please like, comment, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you hear about our new videos. And do tell us if you've ever had any challenges with uneven tension that resulted in some damage because, frankly, we couldn't find any.